we would go to church once every 6 months or so, and it was sort of at like my mom just felt it's time to go to church, and everybody would just sort of roll their eyes and we go and just try to wait it out because usually it was pretty boring.
Right.
And so it wasn't much part of my life, faith, anything like that. And so I never really thought much about God or theological questions, natural theology or anything like that at the time. As an adult, it was a little bit more interesting because, coming to the faith in the California, San Francisco Bay Area, it means something because it's not people aren't inoculated to Christianese there,
right.
And so they have a tendency to sort of to look at you a little bit odd, I guess, and that's fine. I mean, being misunderstood and not part of the world is a fundamental part of historical Christian faith.
Yeah.
Whether it was Paul of Tarsus going out to places saying, "Look, the great God that you have, the unknown God that you have a statue to downtown is here, and he's real, and he's the great and the wise and the real God." When he gave his famous speech there that I'm sort of making a very, very, very broad outline of to Mars Hill, some people said, "We don't believe you." Some people came to the faith, and some people said, "Well, we will hear more of this." And so in that sense, living in the Bay Area, growing up that way, was, it was a little bit of an oddity to see that, to know people who were Christians and all of that stuff. I remember being a kid watching a group of guys that were church folks bowling at a bowling alley that we were at, and I couldn't help but think that those guys were a bunch of weirdos, just because of the way they interacted and sort of went about life. And I think that was probably from the fact that because they were probably trying to live it, to really live out an authentic faith. That there were large swaths of the culture that just didn't rub off on them, and it didn't make sense to me. So, I remember that. Remember being in this bowling alley with these guys, and that I knew from school, from high school, thinking, man, they're a bunch of weirdos.
Huh.
Little did I know that soon I was going to become one of them. Growing up in that sense was a good place to grow up, but it was a decidedly non-Christian environment, and it just wasn't part of life there, as far as anybody that I knew, anybody I could think of. I remember having a conversation with somebody, one of my friends. I was over eating dinner at her house, and we were talking, and she mentioned that her mom was a Pentecostal, and I said, "Well, what is that?" And she described it as, "Oh, well, they just sort of like spin around in a circle until they see God." And I said, so they're more like whirling dervishes or something? Do they drink a bunch of coffee? Do they do drugs? And she said, "No, you just have to go and see." And I said, I think I'll pass."
Yeah.
So in that sense, it was, it's just a different thing. And even today, I think church culture is pretty odd. You have all of these folks who are happy about stuff and sad and about things that maybe, in my opinion, don't matter so much, or they put great stock. A better way to say it would they put great stock in things that don't really matter.
Yeah.
But they only matter to their cultural tradition. Sure. They don't matter to a larger moral landscape, and they certainly don't matter as part of a historical Christian faith. To sort of poke fun at the Pentecostals a little bit, whom some Pentecostals I greatly admire and respect, and maybe some not so much, like any other denomination.
Yeah.
I remember going and listening to this guy speak about his first encounter with Pentecostals, where he worked at a mental hospital down the road from where they were having a revival. And they had to put out a bunch of beds because there was going to be a certain number of people who were so desperate to speak in tongues that they were going to have nervous breakdowns. And they were going to kind of line the place up and just have a little stay there at the mental hospital. And I thought, well, boy, that is rough.
Yeah.
So,
It sounds like it always to me seemed like it just seemed awkward, like the Pentecostal thing. It was, I mean, then it's like they put pressure on you when you're there. I mean, my aunt, when she was young, she went to a Pentecostal church and everybody was pressuring her to speak in tongues, and of course she finally just like made up some gibberish just to get them off her back, So.
Yes. There's a difficult balancing act there. If you're not a cessationist, well, there's a very difficult balancing act between being open to the Spirit and open to what the Spirit is doing, you might say.
Yeah.
But not, falling into this Pentecostal hoo-ha.
Mm-hmm.
And some folks, it's sad, but it's pretty easy in some denominations where they just put such an intense thing on it. You just have to do it. You've got to do these things. Otherwise you're not part of the crew.
Yeah.
Of the team.
Yeah, and then it
socially ostracized. They socially ostracize you, I guess is probably a better way to say it.
Yeah, and then you have the whole thing where you're going to get, like in any sort of ritualistic sense, you're going to get the people that are just attention hungry, that just, look at me, I do this better than everybody else, and, it just becomes a cycle in that way.
I remember a friend of mine telling me about growing up in a Pentecostal church, and he said that at one point in every service, like some dude he got the Spirit, and he would just go run screaming down the front of the main aisle there. He would just go run screaming down the main aisle there, and just sort of start dancing and moving to the music that was playing. Well, one time he did that, and he made some sort of proclamation like he had the Spirit, and then tripped over something in mid-run, and just kind of face planted right into the pulpit, which was kind of wood. And
oh man!
Banged his head and was kind of standing there bleeding and didn't know what to do. So they ended up having to take him to go get some stitches in his nugget.
Wow.
So it's an odd thing, but
yes.
I guess I digress here. I don't even know what we were talking about.
You were just talking about your experiences with these different interactions with different people.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
your observations, so to speak.
Uh-huh. It's a tough one. It was a tough one growing up because I didn't really see a lot of folks, or maybe if I did, it didn't make sense to me, that were like really living out an authentic faith. And I didn't really know what to do other than just say, boy, I sure don't want to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
And maybe that, I'd have to, once we're all in heaven, maybe we'll go back and see that there were tons of people out there who were
authentic.
They were totally authentic, and I was just a jerk. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm sure we've all done our share of that, I think.
Yeah, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of it,
Mm-hmm.
So that was how I grew up, not really interested in Christianity or Christians or anything like that. And I went to school. I went to a music college out in Texas, and I remember hearing some really good. I remember hearing some really good vocals at the Wesleyan Student Union, which happened to be just across the street from my dorm. And I didn't know who Wesley was.
Right.
I didn't know what a student union was. I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So, but the tunes sound really good. So I went over there and was sitting and listening to it. It's like, man, these guys they're great singers. I have no idea what they're singing about, and it was sort of like a modern Christian rock band.
Sure.
And then they started praying. I was like, oh, is this like a religious place? And then this guy walks up and introduces me to himself as pastor, somebody, blah, blah, blah. I went, oh, so this is like a Christian thing. And he said, yeah, you're among friends, brother. I said, oh, well, I'm not a believer. And he looked at me weird, and he said, oh, well, okay, just hang out. Okay.
Awesome. That's cool.
And so, yeah, so it was interesting. It was interesting. On that same story, I remember being in college, I remember another guy who was very, very intense about doing all sorts of stuff as far as evangelism, and I would put that kind of in quotes, but he was very intense about evangelism, so much so that he got all of the people in his dorm, like 12 of them, in the hallway of his dorm, to come and help him move a pool table. Well, so he got a church van, and said, hey, we just need to move this pool table, and they put everybody in the van and drove there. And it was like, man, this is like a lot of people to move a pool table.
Yeah.
And he gets there, there's no pool table, and it's like, it's sort of a Pentecostal revival meeting. People are like jumping off the podium and stuff and being caught in like crowd surfing and speaking in tongues and spinning and dancing and, crazy, just kind of off the hook.
I'm thinking about Blues Brothers right now.
The what?
I'm thinking about Blues Brothers right now for some reason with James
that,
Brown.
That would be a good thing, except I think it was crazier.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like, there was more than just one person, jumping off the thing, and crowd surfing and all this other weird stuff, so it was odd. It was odd for sure. So that sort of stuff made me really not be sort of against Christianity, you might say, almost. To the point where, rather than just be curious, people would be telling me I'm a Christian and you should be a Christian too. And I'd say, no way, no. And they'd ask me about it, and I'd say, it's because I don't see people walking it like they talk it.
Yeah.
They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I just won't have anything to do with it. That's kind of where I found myself, I guess, before I got, before the Lord, I guess, started working on me. Maybe He was working on me the whole time, I don't know. But that's how things kind of started out for the first 22 or 23 years of my life,
Yeah. Hey, so you were in Texas at this time, right?
Uh-huh, for a little while, yeah.
What city or area were you in?
I was a little bit outside of Lubbock, Texas.
Okay.
It was a dry county.
Huh.
And coming from a place like the Napa Valley to a dry county, somebody told me, hey, it's a dry county. And I said, what, you mean it doesn't rain a lot here? Or what does that mean? You got to pay extra for the water? What does that mean? And no, they explained to me that they don't sell alcohol anywhere in the county. And I said, wow, that's really, 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 really weird.
Yeah.
And,
am I in Utah?
Yeah, pretty much. So I really not super into that. And I remember being introduced to what was called, what people called, they called themselves 5 Mile Baptists. And what it was somebody who was a Baptist, but, would go to church and they would say that, we shouldn't drink and all this stuff and alcohol's bad. And then Sunday afternoon they would jump in the car and it would be like the Indy 500 to this town just outside of the county that had a 10,000 square foot warehouse style emporium of beer and wine.
Oh, wow.
And so it would just be like this crazy drive over there. And so 11 o'clock church lets out, and 11:05 there's a mad rush to Rainbow, which was the name of the liquor store. And I thought, man, it's just really hypocritical to do that. So I came at Christianity with a pretty skeptical outlook on all things.
Sure.
It was just no good, people trying to legislate morality and making people do it. If you don't want to do it, too bad. We're going to make you be righteous.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a pretty horrible way to do things, to be honest. So